Welcome to the first class on the structure and details of the second Beis Hamikdash. Now, before we begin, I just want to point out that most of what we're going to be learning is from the Rambam in Hilchos Beis Abchira and from Mishnayos Maseches Midas. So let's begin with 2 points before we actually start learning about the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. The first one is regarding the measurements. So the measurements, when we talk about the Beis Hamikdash, we're in Tfachim and Amas, and we're following the opinion of Reb Chaim Noah that an Amma is almost 19 inches, so it's a little more than 1.5 feet. And the second point is regarding the size of the structures. And this is in order to have context and appreciation for how especially high and tall everything was. So all the doorways in the Beis Hamikdash, except for the one to the Ulam, which was twice the size of all the other doorways. So all the doorways were 20 amos high and 10 amos wide. And this is about 31.5 feet high and 15.5 feet wide, which is about 5.5 times the height of a person. That's 5 feet 10 inches tall. So you can see over here what that looks like. And about as wide as 9 people. Or you could view it about as high as a 3-story house. So that's the size of the doorways, and it gives you a certain sense and appreciation of how high and tall the structures were. So let's begin by going straight to the Har HaBayit. So we're going to learn about the Beis Hamikdash as if we're actually approaching the Beis Hamikdash, so we're going to do it from the outside in. Now, it's very important here to point out that everything is proportional. So the Har HaBayit was a perfect square. It was 500 amos by 500 amos, and at the end of this presentation, we'll give a certain visual of what that looks like. And 500 amos by 500 amos is around 790 feet by 790 feet. Moving along, it says that the whole Har HaBayit was built kiffin al gabi kiffin. So just let's explain briefly what that is. It basically means that there were these kippahs, like a yarmulke, so to speak, these hollow spaces, and the purpose is because if somebody was buried over here, the rule is that tumah is bekas va'ela. If there's somebody buried directly under the ground, then the tumah penetrates upwards and it would enter into the area of the Har HaBayit. However, if there is a space of a tefach, so then the tumah gets captured in that space, and that's why they had one row of these kiffin. However, the problem is if someone was buried right beneath where the 2 kiffin come together, then it would be directly under this structure and it would penetrate upwards, and therefore they built kiffin al gabi kiffin, 2 rows of these kiffin. So if someone is buried here, the tumah gets captured here, and if someone's buried here, then it would get captured in the second row. And this is true for the entire Har HaBayit except for the area of the mizbeach, which has to be mizbeach adama. It has to be directly attached to the ground without any separations beneath it. Moving along back to the Har HaBayit itself. So in the Har HaBayit we have the Azara, and as you can see, we're only talking about the Azara right now, not the Ezras Noshim, which was to the east. Over here it's to the right of the Azara, and the reason is because the Azara is the structure that corresponds to and is parallel to the Mishkan. However, the Ezras Noshim is an additional structure that was added on, and it's not inherent to the structure of the Beis Hamikdash itself. So as we can see over here, the largest space was in the south, then to the east, then to the north, and then the smallest was to the west. And the Tosfos Yontif gives an example of these measurements. However, when we add the Ezras Noshim, so we'll see that actually the smallest is to the east. But nevertheless, what's written in the Mishnayos is that the largest is to the south, then to the east, then to the north, and the smallest is to the west. And the reason is, like we said, because the Ezras Noshim is considered an added structure to the Azara. Now let's learn about the entrances to the Har HaBayit. So there were 2 entrances to the south, one to the east, one to the north, and one to the west. So let's learn a little bit about these entrances. Beginning with Sharei Chuda, so because the south side of the Har HaBayit had the largest open space, and that's where the Yidden would congregate, so therefore there were 2 entrances on that side. And also it's mentioned that the city of Yerushalayim was down south, and therefore that's where most people entered from. Now moving to the east, we have Shar Shushan, and it's called Shar Shushan because they made an engraving of the city of Shushan on top of the gate. Now the wall on top of the Shushan gate was low, and this was so that the Kohen standing on the Har HaMishcha for the Parah Aduma could see into the Heichel, because as we'll see later on, the ground was elevated as we go into the Ezras Noshim, and then further into the Azara, and then finally into the Heichel. And so the Kohen would not be able to see through Shar Shushan from Har HaMishcha into the Heichel, but rather you have to see above Shar Shushan, and as a result they made the wall on top of Shar Shushan a little lower. Then up north we have Shar Tadi, and this shar was not used for going in and going out, except for, as we may discuss later, a kohen who was a balkari. Also, what was unique about this shar is that the top of it wasn't straight, but rather was like an upside-down V, like a tent. There were basically 2 rocks or boulders that were in the shape of an upside-down V. And finally, to the west, we have Shar Kipainus. And this shar was the closest to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and as it's explained in the Mefarshim, that's one of the explanations for why it's called Shar Kipainus. It's related to being the closest to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And one final thing to mention over here is that there was a Bezdin of 23 at the entrance of the Har HaBayit. And the Rambam doesn't tell us if it was at a specific entrance, but there was a Bezdin of 23 judges at the entrance of the Har HaBayit. And finally, for a context of the size of the Har HaBayit, so you can see over here, for those who are familiar with Karnayitz, so here we have Eastern Parkway, and it goes over here, we go to Kingston, you go down to Union, to President, and almost to Carroll, past the alleyway between President and Carroll. The alleyway is here. We go a little further down, so that's 500 amas. And then it's the full block from Kingston to Brooklyn. So this is basically the size, around the size of the Har HaBayit. Here we can see it from a different perspective. Again, you can see it's from the corner of Eastern Parkway and Kingston. We're going down to Brooklyn. So that is the 500 amas in this direction. And then over here it goes down to almost Carroll, like we said. So you have a square 500 amas. Now, one more thing to mention over here regarding the Har HaBayit, the way it is now, compared to how it will be Mirza Hashem when Mashiach comes, is that now it's 500 amas by 500 amas. However, when Mashiach comes, it says it's going to be 3,000 amas by 3,000 amas. So just to get a sense of how big that's going to be. So here we have what the current size of the Har HaBayit is. It's a little blurry, but it's basically here's Eastern Parkway, here's Kingston, here's Brooklyn, and here's Carroll. And this is the size of what the Har HaBayit will be when Mashiach comes. So you can see how much larger that is. It's basically 36 times as big. And with that, we'll finish the first class.